This is an excerpt from the NRSV, the Bible that I typically study from, so it's not exactly the same as what Mark read. It's not a problem. Take a read through it. There is, I think, a really significant word in this text that I think is missed over and over again. It was missed to a large extent in the commentaries that I was reading, and it's missed often in our popular interpretation of this text. It's what I think. You may not find the word. Sorry? Just saying, I'm hearing a couple different things. Distracted is that would be the one I was thinking, but someone said something else. Her home. Yes. So she was inviting, it's got to do with hospitality. But I think that one of the important words in here, and we'll talk more about hospitality in a second, so being invited into her home, I think, is quite significant. But I think that the word there that is important for our interpretation of the story is distracted. And often we don't look at that. We often take a look at this story and go, oh, well, we have Marys, the ones who are doing all sorts of good things, and we've got Marthas, and we've got Marys. They're the ones who are sitting at Jesus' feet in contemplation, and we contrast those two, and sometimes we try to hold them together, but I don't think that's what this story is about. I think the story is about distracted versus focused. And I think that that's quite significant. I said that Martha invited Jesus into her home. I think that that's significant. It has to do with hospitality. And I think it is not a stretch at all to say that one of the significant themes in Jesus' teaching has to do with hospitality. That it's a key part of Christian ministry, has to do with hospitality. Which is why I'm saying that I don't think this story is about hospitality. It's about the doing versus the contemplation sort of thing. Because I think if we take a look at the story of Jesus over and over and over again, we get reinforced the idea that being hospitable, reaching out to people and inviting them in, is a key part of what we as Christians are called to do. In fact, the text immediately preceding this story is the story of the Good Samaritan, which is a story about hospitality, of reaching out and helping someone who's in need. So I don't think that one can make an argument here that Jesus is talking about how great contemplation is versus the doing sorts of things. I think that the overarching theme in what Jesus talks about is over and over again has to do with hospitality, has to do with reaching out and doing something with our neighbors and the people around us. I think that this text, with that key word, this text has to do with being distracted and being focused. So, in the story, we have Martha, who seems to be doing everything that she ought to be doing. According to stories like the Good Samaritan story and other ones that Jesus teaches, she seems to be getting it right. She invites him in. She's doing the hospitality thing. She's getting ready. She's getting a meal ready. You can't invite someone into your house without providing a meal. And she's doing all the things that a person ought to be doing who is being hospitable. And somehow, she's not getting it right. She's doing what she should be doing, and her sister isn't. It's the North American painting, the color of her face and the anger in it it's part of this story. She is just getting really, really frustrated to the point where she goes up to their guest and asks their guest to tell off her sister to get her sister to help her out. Which has got to be breaking all sorts of rules of hospitality. When you invite someone in and you're being hospitable, you're not bringing them into the family dispute. Now, it is entirely possible that there's more than one thing happening in this story, that things are happening at different levels. Mary and Martha undoubtedly have got some history. I mean, they're sisters. By definition, there's some history here. And so there may be some frustration that similar things have happened before, but that's not actually part of what the story has to say. It's not about their struggle. I think the key thing here is this word distracted. Martha was doing what she understood to be right, but in the fact she was being distracted from what was really important at that moment. Now, it's really easy for us to do the same thing. I suspect that every one of us can, without a great deal of thought, think of moments in our lives where we have been doing things that are good things. Preparing a meal for guests is a good thing. But where we recognize that somehow along the way we got distracted and we weren't doing the best thing. We weren't doing the most important thing. I know, having lived in the Middle East and being the recipient of some sorts of this hospitality, that some people's hospitality can be fairly simple. It can be very nice. There can be some food, but it doesn't need to be hordes and hordes of food. And other places I went, I can remember one meal we were invited into someone's house and we got pigeons. Lots of pigeons. Pigeons don't have a lot of meat on them, so you actually need more than one. But it was an extravagant meal, and I suspect that this is part of what Martha was working at. That the meal she was preparing was over the top. Because she was distracted. She was thinking it was really important to get the whole meal right. And actually spending time with her guest, well, that wasn't part of her agenda. I'm guessing that's part of what it is. But I'm thinking, as men, there are lots of times in our lives, my life, where I found it easy to get some of the priorities, the big priorities in my life, off. One of the priorities that most of us men get is that we need to provide for our families. And so we work at that. We work hard at it. And sometimes that means that we spend a lot of time at work. Well, that means that we don't do some other things. What it might mean is that we actually don't spend as much time with, our families, that while we're trying to provide for them, we're actually not hanging around them. But I also know people who don't invite people into their homes, who aren't particularly hospitable, because they're a little bit embarrassed by their house. Maybe it's not clean enough, but maybe it's not grand enough. Maybe they can't put on a fancy enough spread. I think this is some of the stuff that Martha was struggling with. So we don't do it at all. So there's lots of times and lots of ways in our lives, and those are sort of more the big things, but there's lots of ways on a regular basis that we make choices about what we're doing in our lives. And we may choose good things. It's good to provide for our families. But maybe we need to be thoughtful about how we take that and how far we take it. And are all the choices we're making along the way good choices, or are there in fact better choices? Not to say that what we're doing is not good, but maybe there's something even better. Or maybe when it comes to inviting people into our house, the being with our neighbors or the people who we might invite in is more important than what our house looks like. And there's some things there that we're making some choices because of our concerns of our own stuff, and not in terms of what we can do and how we can reach out. As our world becomes more and more complex and faster, I think it's becoming easier for us to choose to do good things and harder for us to choose to do the best things. And one of the ways that works out is, and I know this is very true for Susan and I, when we get home, we're so glad to be home, it's nice to shut the front door and just relax. But what that means is that we're not connecting with some of the people around us. Each one of us has a limited amount of time. There are only 24 hours in a day, and we each need to sleep in there, and there's a few other things that we need to do. And so by the time you start eliminating it, you start realizing how finite the amount of time is. But even if it's not time, even if we have lots and lots of time, we may not have lots and lots of energy. And so there's a finite amount of energy. And so we need to work with time or energy or both and make good choices, because the reality is that when we choose to do one thing, that means we're choosing not to do other things. We can't do it all. There are some people who try to do it all. And they may be successful for brief periods of time, but on the long haul, they can't be. In fact, most of us know that there are brief periods of time when we push the edges in terms of the amount of time we have or the amount of energy we have, and we can get away with it for a brief period of time. And sometimes we just know we have to do it. That the circumstances in our life are such that for the next week, for the next 2 weeks, we have to push through. But you can't keep doing it. Something suffers. And in my experience, what typically suffers is sleep, and that has consequences for all sorts of other things, or time with my family, or time with God, or exercise. All the sort of things that are helpful for me to keep healthy. Those are the things that get dropped fastest because they're the most flexible. And they get dropped and I push and I know what starts happening. And it's not a good thing. So even if the things that we're choosing to do are good things, ultimately there's a limit to how many good things we can do. And what we're not necessarily doing is stopping and pausing and thinking and asking, even though this is a very good thing to do, is it the best thing to do? And we often can't ask that question because we're distracted, because our lives are already so packed full that we're not able to see right. Like Martha, we get distracted. And sometimes we need to walk away from something that's good, something that's very positive that we're doing, because by doing it, we're not able to do something else that's even better. Sometimes we need to walk away from a lesser opportunity so that we can do something that we're really called to do. We can do something that we are created to be able to do. Each one of us has a unique set of skills and abilities and connections with people around us. Nobody else in the whole world has that same combination. And sometimes there are things that we can do because of that combination that no one else can do. That starts bumping that sort of thing up much higher on the priority list. When we keep trying to add things to our lives, or even if you take a look at the things that are already in your life, at points we need to pause and step back and remind ourselves, how has God created us? What are the things that God has put into our lives, the abilities, the gifts, the people, the relationships? And how is it that God is desiring for me to make use of those?